welcome back to Human Events. First time back in a little bit since we've been going live. Ladies and gentlemen, Gavin Wax, the chairman of the New York Young Republicans, who was also there last week with us in Bedminster at the Sound of Freedom. Gavin, how did you like that event last week?
Jack, it was great seeing you there. It was a great event. The energy was fantastic. It was a private screening, largely for members of Trump's Bedminster Club, but it was a larger event than anything we've seen on the primary trail from many of his opponents thus far. But you could feel the emotion. You could feel, the sentiments in I can't even say the room because it was outside, but you get my drift. You could feel the sentiments from people watching this film and how it really touches people's hearts, how it really inflames the emotions. And we saw President Trump in the front row, watching the entire thing from beginning to end, arms crossed, took it in. And as you pointed out on Twitter, the very next day, or maybe 2 days later, I forget the timeline, he came out, he said death penalty for child traffickers. So we love to see this happening. We love to see, the radicalization continue, if you will. But the movie was beautiful. It was incredibly well made. It's a shame that it took this long to hit movie theaters, especially since it's been a unifying type of film. It hasn't been really a partisan film. It's been a film that's been bringing the country together on what many should accept as a very reprehensible, disgusting facet of modern society, which is this human trafficking crisis coming through our porous southern border. And we need to get real about it. We need to tackle it, and we need to understand the victims and all the lives impacted by this horrible, horrible plague on modern society.
So, Gavin, you were up there with the president. I shared my recollections and my observations. Obviously, members of the campaign were there. I had a chance to speak with some. I'm sure you would speak to some as well. I think the general sense within the Trump campaign is that the primary is over. That was my assessment. And that they're starting to move into general election focus. Obviously, you're seeing that this weekend because President Trump is announcing a rally up in Pennsylvania. Now, Pennsylvania is not an early state when it comes to the primaries, but it is an important state it is probably one of the most important states for the general, that Rust Belt, Erie County area where he's going to be drawing in people potentially from Ohio because it's right across the border. So that being said, what is the next phase of the campaign for President Trump, if he's able, or at least in terms of how they're thinking based on your recollections and assessments, do you think they're prepared for everything, not just that Joe Biden, his team are going to throw at him, but the regime is going to throw at him? Gavin Wax.
Well, listen, I agree with everything how you laid it out. I think the primary is effectively over. I think on the DeSantis side, they've entered kamikaze stage, just trying to take down as many people with them, and they're sinking poll numbers. And I think the Trump campaign is happy to, take some funny dunks here or there, but effectively, as you said, this primary is over, and they are now repositioning themselves for the general, which I think is a great strategy. We've seen the polls been pretty neck and neck. We've never seen a Trump poll like this in 16 or 2020. So I think we have a historical basis to believe that his coalition going into 2024 will be his most robust to date, incumbent versus incumbent. We haven't seen this type of election since Grover Cleveland. And you bring up the rally in Erie. I mean, this is a purple county in a purple state, and this is really the keystone, if you will, to flipping the country back into the hands of Republicans at the presidential level. So what I'm seeing is they are making that shift. They are beginning to reposition themselves. But again, this is going to be a very unique election cycle. We're not just focused on the primary. We're not just focused on the general election. We're also focused on the concurrent fight with the deep state apparatus, with the regime, the weaponized DOJ, where they're indicting him left, right, and center. I've yet to hear an argument why they would be doing that unless they were scared of him, but, that's for another time. But yes, the DOJ, all these politicized indictments, the weaponized judicial system coming after the president. I don't believe it's going to, keep him off the ballot, but I certainly think it's going to be designed to drain his coffers, to drain his resources, and to drain his time. It's being used as a stunting mechanism to stunt the campaign, before it could really even take off into the general election. I don't think it's worked like they would have intended from a PR perspective. I mean, I think the donor class, the super PACs, the people backing DeSantis really convinced themselves that these indictments would have had an impact of, sinking his approval rating, sinking his poll numbers in the primary and the general. We actually haven't seen that. It actually hasn't hurt him from a polling perspective. If anything, it's strengthened him, certainly within the Republican Party as a martyr. But what I think it's really now being designed to do, I think their secondary task is to drain much needed resources from this campaign. And I think that's really the fight that we're in. I have the full confidence in the campaign to be able to tackle this, to be able to fight back against it. I mean, this has been a very lean operation, the Trump campaign so far. It's a lean, effective operation where they've just hit the ground running, gone against these well-funded opponents, not just Ron DeSantis, but also the Tim Scotts of the world and whoever. And they've just been able to crush them with sort of a skeleton crew, a very effective, competent skeleton crew. You haven't seen any unforced errors in the primary or even as far as the general election posturing. So this leaves a lot of room to be optimistic. And again, if we look at the historical analysis to bring up the polls, it goes to show that he's going into 2024 in the strongest position he's ever been going into one of his elections. And I think, the only variable here that's a little novel, that's new, are these indictments. But I think overall, the impact on the general election will be negligible outside of the drain of the resources and money and funds from the Trump campaign.
Well, that being said, it's going to be more than just funds because, and I'm just going to say it, that in the same way that they went after Steve Bannon in Washington, D.C., they've gone after Stone and Flynn and Papadopoulos. Everybody knows the list. Okay, everybody knows the list at this point. Manafort. If they're able to get Donald Trump in a courtroom in Washington, D.C. over this January 6th or one of these other things, I don't think there is any chance that a D.C. jury acquits Donald Trump of anything. They could charge him with jaywalking. They could charge him with, shooting somebody without evidence. They would find him guilty in Washington, D.C. because there's so much palpable Trump hatred there. So is he prepared? And to your point, I don't think they'll be able to get him off the ballot. That might go to the Supreme Court. What should conservatives be prepared for, though, if Trump is actually convicted in any of these cases?
No, listen, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, legally speaking, it's definitely going to be tough. I think this is a race against time. I think, delaying action here is really the name of the game, pushing these trials back, pushing, all of these matters back as far as possible to make sure that he's, won the primary, he's on the ballot for the general election, and fighting many of the separate, measures that could be happening through rules changes, through bylaw changes, through fights at the conventions, anything that the establishment can sort of dig up to tie his candidacy and tie his ability to be on the ballot to the status of these cases. I think those are something that we can't let fall by the wayside. But listen, I think right now we need to get him into the White House. We need to get him elected. I think that is the best guarantee going forward, because I agree with you. I think he's never going to get a fair trial. And I think a lot of these things, we're going to need injunctions. We're going to need to move straight to the Supreme Court, where I think a lot of these matters will end up. It's going to be a long, rocky road. It's certainly going to be very messy. It's really going to destroy the last ounces of legitimacy most Americans have in our judicial and legal system. But, at the end of the day, I think it's a wake-up call for most Americans. And I think we need to continue to stand by the president. We need to show his support. We need to get behind him. We need to rally for him. We need to peacefully assemble, exercising all of our, rights that we have as Americans, and not be scared to do so. But it's certainly going to be a rocky road. I think ultimately he will prevail. I am optimistic, and I think that's the best thing we could be right now, because I think a lot of this is designed to be a demoralization campaign. They want you to think it's over. They want you to think that the battle's already done, that there's nothing we can do, and to go home, to stay home, to not support the president, to not come out and voice your opinion. They want you to think the game is up, it's rigged. I think that's part of their power projection, and I think there's actually a lot of holes in their legal arguments. Obviously, whether or not we could get a fair jury or a fair judge is another question. But again, there's always recourse, there's legal recourse, and moving these things up to the Supreme Court is always going to be on the table. So it's going to be a rocky road. I'm sure they have a lot more up their sleeve, not just for the legal cases, but also for things that could come down to, manipulating results in terms of how they're going to have the voter laws structured, what they're going to do to reform or not reform, rather, some of the systems in place going into 2024. I mean, this is going to be the battle, this boss battle, if you will, for the heart and soul of our republic. And they're going to pull out all the stops this cycle to ensure that they can try to defeat Trump and his new coalition. And I think it's going to come down to the wire, but we have to be vigilant. We have to stay on top of all these different issues and how they're all, interconnected. And going forward, that's just going to be the name of the game for Republicans. And again, if you simply think, if you're someone on the sidelines who doesn't like Trump and you think it's going to end with Trump, I mean, you're deluded. I mean, this is a trial run, if you will. This is something that they are testing to see if they can set a precedent, if they can set a game plan going forward to knock out anyone who be a threat to the system at large. And if they succeed with Trump, it's going to put us in a really, really tough place as a nation if we weren't already there. So we can't allow them to set that kind of horrible precedent with these cases, with whatever they're doing in the courts and in the state legislatures.
Gavin, we're coming up on a break, but I want to hold you on that because I think that's exactly right. Because people need to understand, if the Department of Justice is able to decide who is allowed to run for office in the United States, if they decide that they can do this to any candidate, any future leader, then that means that every other future leader will not be one who is a threat to the police state in this country. Stay tuned. We're coming up next with more from Gavin Wax.
I encourage people to, if you're interested in foreign policy, you got to follow Jack Posobiec.
All right, folks, I want to tell you about a new sponsor here at Human Events, Fume. Fume is an innovative, award-nominated essential oils infuser. There's no electronics. Fume is completely natural. There's no use of vapor. Fume uses essential oil-flavored air, and there's no harmful chemicals. Fume uses all-natural, delicious flavors. Now, this is a habit that Human Events listeners can get behind. It's a habit you are free to enjoy and can make replacing your existing bad habit easier. Producer Foz tried Fume out, and he said that it was a pleasant surprise. Flavorful and fresh, well-balanced, looks fantastic, made with real wood, feels great to use. Stopping a bad habit is something we all put off because it's hard. But I'm told that switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has had thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that can't be you. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com and use promo code POSO to save 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use promo code POSO again for 10% off your order today. We're going to get back to our interview with Gavin Wax, the head of the New York Young Republicans. Now, Gavin, when you're talking to people across the country, you interface with a lot of other Young Republican chapters, a lot of other groups around, young adult activists like we had at Turning Point last week. One thing that I want people to understand is that, and I hear this all the time, that they say, well, Trump's got too much baggage, and if you nominate Trump, there's going to be no way to win the general because independents will be turned off if he is found convicted in one or multiples of these cases. And I'm saying right now, people need to understand that is what's coming. The media will have a steady drumbeat of convicted criminal, convicted criminal, convicted criminal. That is their playbook. How do you go to somebody then who's one of those voters that says, I don't know about this guy, and get them to come on board?
Well, listen, I reject their narrative. I mean, I'm not seeing that in the numbers. Again, it's going to show that he has been gaining ground, that he has been strengthening his position in the general election as time has gone on. He's been neck and neck in the RCP average. Will an actual conviction change that? I suppose you could make an argument, but we're really getting into hypotheticals here. I think at the end of the day, for these people on the sidelines, you have to make it very clear to them what time they're living in. And it doesn't matter who is going to be running. Anyone who is an actual threat, anyone who's actually going to bring about real positive change in the way President Trump did in his first term under massive duress, I may add, is they're going to come up with baggage. They're going to construct baggage. They're going to nail them one way or another. And that's what really these indictments are. I mean, the New York indictment is absolutely pathetic. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, they're charging him for the furtherance of a crime, but they don't even state what the underlying crime is. I mean, it's all just legalistic nonsense and unproven legal theory. So at the end of the day, we are entering a period of time in our country where they are trying to set a precedent that they can knock out a political opponent, the leader of the opposition, and come up with any no pun intended, trumped up charges to do it. And if you're allowing that to happen, if you're going to cede ground, if you're going to accept the left's frame, the establishment's frame, then we're never going to be in a position again to retake the reins of government and power in this country. We're never going to be in a position to bring about an American national renewal, because any figure in a post-Trump America will be subject to the same tactics and the same playbook that they have now used against the president. So we need to set the stage now that this cannot happen, that this will not work, that it will not be allowed to continue. And I honestly would love to see some serious reforms passed legislatively to protect presidents and candidates from this kind of nonsense going forward. I think that would be a common sense reform, but we're not even at that stage in terms of talking about it. But it is a sad state of affairs, and I think most people need to realize that they are trying to create the narrative that this makes them unelectable. And I think fundamentally, to answer your question, there's no quantitative data to back that up. What we are seeing is that he's only been strengthened in the primary, in the general, and he is the best candidate in the Republican field to retake the White House, bar none.
Well, look, and to be honest, I think that's why you can see from the campaign's perspective, they know that Biden only won, and you know, to get into the fact that all of the mail-in ballot laws were thrown completely out the window during COVID, that he only won by marginal votes in marginal margins in these areas. Marginal margins, those are a great word. That when you talk about 10,000, 12,000, 15,000 in a few of these areas, Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, well, Michigan was more, but Wisconsin, that you would have the ability. That's why I think the campaign is willing to take time and effort and resources away from some of those early voting states, because like Iowa, like South Carolina, like New Hampshire, that they're going directly back to the Rust Belt to start building the infrastructure there in order to win over those specific states. Because I think there's a disconnect here of people talking about the election as if it's in some kind of vacuum, when it's not in a vacuum. It happens in the 50 states. We know where the swing states are. We know where the purple states are. We know where the battlegrounds are. That's why that's exactly where they're going. Where are you, and I know this has been a debated topic, but where are you on this question of early voting, ballot harvesting, ballot chase, all of the rest of that, the Scott Presler question?
Listen, my view has remained the same. Anything that is a legal electoral strategy, we should be taking advantage of. And then once we're in a position of power to change the laws, I'm absolutely in favor of changing them. But we can't complain about the rules of the game as they've been set and try to win with our hand tied behind their back. That's us going into a gunfight with a knife. And that's how the Democrats want us to play, with one hand tied behind our back and bringing the wrong weapon to said fight. Right now, if there are states that allow, the ballot harvesting, if they allow certain mail-in rules, whatever it may be, take advantage of them to the fullest extent possible. And we have seen a record of Republican parties in various states where these things have been allowed and they have taken advantage of them, see some success. Now, I totally understand the argument that these are not, great systems to have for an election, and we should certainly reform them when and where we can. But in the interim, we have to use all the tools at our disposal and fight, to tooth and nail on the margins to make sure that this race is tightened up. And I also want to bring up the point that you opened with, that 2020 was a historic race. It was an unprecedented race. You had basically a color revolution in this country. You had a global pandemic, whatever you want to call it, and the summer of love. I don't think any incumbent president would have fared better than President Trump did under those circumstances. And we are not going to have a 2020 style election in 2024. We are going to have an incumbent whose favorability continues to tank, with an economy that continues to remain sluggish, with a global, foreign policy, situation in shambles. All of these things are going to work to President Trump's advantage, particularly in the Rust Belt. And like you mentioned, we're talking about 40,000 votes split across 3 states. This is not some electoral insurmountable odds that we're facing here. This is a matter of, running a campaign well, tackling all these issues, in a coherent manner, and we could certainly win this election if we stay united. But I think there is a concerted effort by the establishment, by the left, to divide the Republican Party in this primary and to put President Trump in the weakest possible position going into the general, because they know he fares the best out of anyone against Biden. And I think the Rust Belt will again prove to be the path for him to retake the White House. And there's simply no other candidate who has the appeal to the Rust Belt, who has the appeal to these nonpartisan voters, these voters who are really just Trump voters. They're, first-time voters. And at the end of the day, Trump recreated the electoral map. He brought entire new cohorts into the coalition, entire new cohorts into the electoral landscape. He didn't just look at the pieces on the table and say, what pieces I have to take. He picked up handfuls of new pieces and threw them on the table and won that way. And no one has that strategy. It's not going to be suburban reversion in Northern Virginia or the Atlanta suburbs. It's going to be a strategy of broadening the coalition, creating this emerging populist coalition in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And that's going to be the acceleration of the realignment that allows Republicans to actually have comfortable wins at the national level again, rather than relying on old and 20 years out of date coalitions that are no longer voting for us. And I think there's a lot of lag in the understanding within the Republican hierarchy about where the pulse of the party is at the present. It's not in the country clubs. It's not in these wealthy upper middle class suburbs. It's in these working class Rust Belt towns, these working class areas in Appalachia or the Deep South. That is the new coalition that we need to move forward with, and we can start winning elections again if we embrace it. But up until now, no one has embraced it except President Donald J. Trump.
Gavin, a couple minutes left. What do the young Republicans have coming up throughout this year to get ready for 2024? Do you have any elections? Do you have any organizations going on, any movements? What's in the cards?
Absolutely. Well, here locally in New York City, we have local elections for city council. The club has been at the forefront of electing many members of the city council in Queens and Brooklyn, the outer boroughs. Most of them are members of the club now. Their offices are staffed with club members. We're going to be continuing that tradition. We have several races that we are hitting the ground running on, deploying for, door knocking for, canvassing for. So it's going to be a fun electoral cycle. But on the fun side, we have a lot of great events coming up, namely our 111th annual gala. This is going to be the last gala before the election. So hopefully it's going to be a good one. We're going to have a great send-off going into 2024. That is December 9th, 2023. You in the past have been an honoree, an awardee, a guest speaker, a keynote at our gala. This is a beautiful... a beautiful black tie affair. We're expecting 600-700 people. We're going to be at Cipriani Wall Street, which is the largest and frankly, I think most prestigious venue in the city of New York. We're going to have a great lineup of speakers. You're going to be returning as an honored guest, along with the greats like Steve Bannon and many others that are soon to be announced. So we're looking forward to a great event to send off the new year and hopefully celebrate a primary that will be wrapping up very soon and a general election that we will be securing with great gusto, which I fully expect to happen. So if you're interested, NYYRC's 111th annual gala, December 9th in New York City, in the belly of the beast. Wear your finest and come and show support and rub shoulders with all of the right wing's biggest villains and anti-heroes.
The biggest heroes and anti-heroes. Man, I remember the last time we held the event there, MSNBC lost their minds for a week, Gavin. They lost their minds for a week. Gavin Wax, you continue to trigger all the right people. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for being on, joining us here at Human Events.
Thank you, sir. God bless.